Finally, I have the Mac Mini in my hands, and today we're going to be doing a video on it. What is up guys, it's Matt here. Today we're doing a review of the Mac Mini. Now this is the M1 Mac Mini, it's the latest one, and you know the M1 lineup is actually pretty good, and it's overly hyped I think, but nonetheless I think it's great, and the price is also great as well. So this Mac Mini prices in at $699 or respectively £699. No idea where that exchange rate conversion comes from, and it does come with 8GB of RAM, but you can upgrade it for an additional $200, which is kind of pricey. But I do recommend upgrading the RAM because if you're going to be doing heavier things like video editing or Photoshop, then you're just going to need more space to run those larger programs, and you can't upgrade like down the line like other computers. So once you get 8GB, you're kind of stuck with it, and you can't even plug in expandable via the USB-C port. So yeah, I would highly recommend you just go ahead and pick up the 16GB of RAM. If you're a pro user and you need more RAM, like 32, 64, then you may want to wait around just for later on this year, because Apple's bound to announce a more pro machine. And these are kind of entry levels, but they're still very exciting because they're just the new Apple Silicon. And Apple's never really done something like this in a while. They've been using Intel. And so just seeing something new is kind of a little bit nice from Apple. Even though the form factor is pretty similar, especially on this Mac Mini, it looks identical to the older version. And something I already don't like about it physically is the fact that it only comes in silver. I'm presuming there's going to be a pro version, which will be in space gray, and that's kind of why they did that. But honestly, it just doesn't match any of my stuff, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, talking about the form factor, it's just that aluminum box. Looks pretty much the same as the old one. It's the same dimensions and everything like that. But the new things are the chip inside, as well as the more efficient cooling, and obviously the chip doesn't get as hot either. So overall, I've found that the fan doesn't really come on too much. It's actually a pretty silent machine, and I'm actually really enjoying it. I mean, I've never really had a desktop Mac before. I've had an iMac in the past, but I really just plug my laptop into these two monitors behind me, and I've absolutely loved it. The only thing is it's kind of hiccupy, like these are two 4K monitors, and when I connected them up to my laptop, honestly, it's just not as smooth as the M1 Mac Mini is. And to be honest, I was a little bit worried because Apple specifies that you can only run one monitor from this Mac Mini, but you can actually plug in through the HDMI as well as the USB-C to DisplayPort. That's how I've got this set up, and overall it works absolutely great. I'm running at 4K 60Hz with no issues. It's buttery smooth, and you know, overall in terms of performance, it is definitely a jump up for some applications over my Intel laptop, especially Final Cut. Now, when I exported a 4K 30 FPS 10-minute clip, which was recorded on my GH4, that took about 7 minutes 12 seconds on my MacBook Pro, which is maxed out, top spec, and it's the 15-inch one, so it's not quite the latest one, but still 7 minutes I thought was decent. Exporting on the Mac Mini M1, 3 minutes and 20 seconds, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, there's much faster export times. Obviously, Apple make Final Cut, and so it's going to be better optimized for the M1 chip because Apple has full control over software and hardware. But apart from Final Cut, obviously just basic apps like Safari and things like that have been updated to work on the M1. And honestly, they are flawless. Like, they work so snappy. It almost makes me not want to use Chrome. And talking about Chrome, there is some bugginess to it. I mean, they've done updates and it seems a little bit more stable now, but when I first installed Chrome, it was definitely not like a full-fledged browser or anything you'd want to use daily. This thing was very buggy, more buggy than some beta versions I've had in the past, but they seem to be patching it up fairly well. And you know, it is Apple, so I feel like developers sort of do push updates faster than other companies out there. So, you know, we will be seeing updates for the M1 software. But things like the Adobe suite are still running for the older Macs, like the Intel versions. And so they're using Rosetta, which is kind of like a translator, in order to run the old Intel programs on Apple's Silicon chip. And you know, Adobe are definitely working on an M1 version, so it will come out soon. And it's just really, the meantime, it feels a bit like a beta test. So, you know, some applications don't work, which is very rare, but there is definitely some. So you will need to check that out if you have some software you rely on. But then there's also applications which do work, but just not quite well. And then there's these applications that work flawlessly. So it's nice, but on the Intel Mac, you're getting overall just more stability and things work more consistently. On the M1, it's a bit of a gamble whether things will work good or bad. In my experience though, I do use a lot of stock Apple software like Safari and Final Cut, and even the Adobe suite. It works absolutely fine. I've had no issues whatsoever. So if you're worried about anything like that, don't. If it's a popular software, the companies will update it and it will be optimized well. But in terms of just small software that it might not be so popular, then you might want to worry a little bit. So do make sure you are 100% about picking up an Apple Silicon and that all the software capabilities are there before you do pick it up, because otherwise you might be a little bit screwed. So just make sure that beforehand. But if all the software is compatible and you do want to make that next step, obviously it's future-proof because Apple's going to be making more applications and more support, and so are developers for the future of Apple Silicon, and Intel is going to die off. So if you're thinking about buying now, I would say don't buy an Intel unless you really, really specifically need something that only works on the Intel Mac, like even Boot Camp. That's something that is a bit of a downside. Boot Camp doesn't work on the new M1, which I really did love. I loved Boot Camp. It was really cool. And you know, Apple isn't saying they won't allow it. They're definitely saying they will allow it, but the only thing is Windows, it's their software, and so they would have to optimize it for the M1, which does seem quite unlikely. But I guess, fingers crossed, who knows in this world, 2021, let's hope for the best. Now taking a look on the back, there's an Ethernet port. Obviously Apple had to include this. It's not as fast as the older Mac Mini I've heard. And then you have two USB Type A ports. You have two USB-C Thunderbolt ports, which you can use to plug in like monitors or expandable storage. I've actually got a T7 drive plugged in, which is actually a very fast external drive. If you don't want to pick up like a higher storage version of the Mac Mini, you can pick up an SSD, which is pretty much the way to go because you're not really going to be moving this around much. But it's also got a HDMI port, so you can plug it into your monitor that way. And then you also have your 3.5mm output. Now, something interesting is there is a speaker in the Mac Mini, but it's very, very, very bad. Like, don't ever use this for maybe more than accessibility if you can't see the screen when you boot this up. This is really awful. You will want to pick up some headphones or even a speaker or something because it's pretty much unusable. When I first booted up the Mac, I did need to use an official Apple wireless mouse and keyboard in order to set it up, but you will need some sort of wired keyboard or something you can plug in because there's no way of connecting just random Bluetooth devices when you first boot up, which is kind of annoying. I was a little bit worried actually, but luckily I did have a Magic Mouse and I used that to set it up. But if you don't, you might be a little bit screwed. So you do need to make sure you have a wired mouse or something. But once I set it up, I connected my Logitech MX Master as well as my Satechi keyboard. And honestly, I can say it works pretty good. There is some hiccups I find with the mouse if you go a little bit further away, but I'm not too sure if that's to do with my mouse, but I have heard rumors about the Bluetooth being a little bit iffy on the M1. But in terms of the keyboard and everything, it seems to work okay. It just tends to be when you go further away and you have other devices in your room that might interrupt with it. But obviously this thing is super snappy. You've got the new M1 chip, which is more efficient. So obviously I mentioned the fans. It's quite quiet on your desk. It doesn't get very hot and applications run like a dream, especially heavy applications. They just run buttery smooth, especially the ones optimized for the M1. And, you know, I can say without a doubt, this is definitely the best Mac that Apple have made so far. In terms of like a desktop, it's definitely better than any other desktop out there. I wouldn't even consider buying anything else other than the M1. You can also pick up, obviously, the new laptops, which have this chip in as well. So if you do want that long battery life and portability of a laptop, then you're also getting the performance of this. So there's a few things to consider, but in terms of desktop Mac, I think it's a no-brainer. You will want to pick up the M1 unless you're waiting out for the higher spec version, which is bound to come out in 2021. Now, just before I end the video, I do want to mention that Apple does state you can run iOS apps on this. Now, it does kind of work, but many developers have opted out, so you can't get things like Facebook or YouTube or just even like Snapchat, Instagram. And you know, I think that'd be kind of cool. That'd be kind of nice to have those socials and post straight to Instagram from your desktop, but you can't do that. So yeah, I don't really see much point. There's a few applications that you can use, but they're honestly just not the best. So don't even consider buying this if it's specifically to run iOS apps. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my video, my overall impressions and review of the Mac Mini. If you do have any comments or any questions, definitely do let me know down below. And we are on the road to 50K. Here we come. Peace.